SRM Institute of Science and Technology, Engineering, Medical and Health Sciences, Management, Dental, Science and Humanities, Law, Agriculture Sciences, Hotel Management. Admissions open.
When you live in a fast-moving, ever-changing world, life brings forth unlimited possibilities. Yours to explore, excite, enjoy, educate, evaluate, and elucidate with elan. Never stop moving forward with Darwin Platform Group. Darwin Platform Group, the visionaries.
Thyrocare, the trust, the truth.
With that, we come to the first session of the Virtual Business Today Mind Rush. We start off the day with a series of keynote addresses. The first keynote, not surprisingly, is something of concern to all of us. It is on the Indian economy at a time when India's GDP growth has contracted sharply. What are the options for catalyzing growth? And who better than Dr. Arvind Panagariya himself explaining us the nuances of the Indian economy. Of course, Dr. Panagariya needs no introduction, but here we have a small introduction for him. He has a doctorate in economics from Princeton University and he was awarded the prestigious Padma Bhushan in 2012. He was also the first vice chairman of Niti Aayog.
I have been asked to speak on the Indian economy. What I would do is to give you a quick background and then we get to the contemporary and the future. So first of all, the present government started in May 2014 and at the time the growth rate in the last 2 years of the outgoing government had averaged about 5.9%, so a little below 6%. In the first 4 years of the Modi government, then growth rate averaged 7.7%. We tend to forget, actually, our perceptions are so much governed by what we see today that it is very easy to forget that for 4 years, we actually grew 7.7% on an average. Then in the fifth year, growth rate declined to 6.1%. And in the last, which is 2019-20, growth rate further dipped to just 4.2%. 4.2% was really the lowest growth rate in the 2010s decade. So this was quite a matter of concern. Largely, my view has been that this had to do with the rather delayed response by the government on fixing the financial sector. In particular, the non-performing assets had been accumulating. It was very clear that government needed to move as early as, I think, 2015, but that action got delayed. We started much too late. And even then, the recapitalization that was done was a bit inadequate and took much longer than it should have. In any case, we'll return to these issues. That's a background going into COVID. Then, of course, in March, COVID hit, and that, of course, led to an unprecedented decline in the GDP growth. For the quarter, April to June of 2020, growth dipped year on year 24%, 23.9, so I'll round it off to 24%. I think there has been some controversy about whether this was reflected some sort of fundamental weakness in the economy or largely the impact of COVID. My own view has been that other than the financial sector, which still needs some more work, the economy was sound. There's nothing fundamentally wrong, and the decline really is entirely attributable to COVID. Economies that had been hit equally hard in Europe declined similarly. Spain, for example, fell about 22%, UK 21.7%, Italy 17%. So we were sort of in that kind of ballpark. The United States, where actually the impact of COVID during that quarter was limited to a few states, fell only 9 to 10%. So it was very much an impact of COVID. If you look at the sectors such as construction, transportation, hotel, etc., these were the most kind of impacted sector, manufacturing as well. So these were agriculture, on the other hand, which was not so much impacted by the very strict lockdown that India went into, grew at its trend rate of about 3.4%. Second quarter, clearly, again, because the economy had been opened up, the growth rate did come up, meaning not growth rate, but the GDP decline did fall in the second quarter. Then July to September of 2020, growth rate was minus 7.5%. So from a decline of about 24%, we came to 7.5%. And sectorally, again, agriculture did fine. Manufacturing came into positive territory as well, only modestly so though, 0.6%. Electricity came down 4-5%, somewhere there, positive. But on the other hand, construction, transport, hotel, etc., which are the sectors that got impacted by this lack of movement of the workforce as well as households as buyers in the marketplace. Those are the sectors, that got impacted a lot more. It is the impact of the COVID, and really now where we stand is, by all accounts, the upward movement of the economy in the months of October and November has continued. All indicators that we have, the high frequency indicators on which we rely for such short-term statistics, with the more definitive ones to come with some lag, indicate that the economy is continuing its upward movement. So I'm sort of optimistic on that front. Now, how can the government speed up this recovery? To my mind, there are about 3 or 4 things that the government ought to really think in terms of doing right now. Other than monetary policy, about which I will not say very much. I think monetary policy is doing what it is supposed to do. I've been sort of quite pleased that the central bank, Reserve Bank of India, has shown a good bit of tolerance towards inflation. Normally when inflation goes beyond 6%, the central bank really comes down heavily on money supply. But it has not done that. It has been more accommodative, and I think that's a very, very good thing. But on the government side, government policy side, there are 3 or 4 things that I would recommend right now. Number 1, I think, vaccine. In the end, recovery of the economy very much depends on recovery from COVID. And so the faster we bring under control the spread of virus, the faster the economy will return to its pre-COVID level. I think we ought to be aggressive on this, even if we spend anything like, even as much as $8 to $10 billion of public money. That will be money very well spent, for the simple reason that for every week that we advance the recovery of the economy, we will be recovering several $1 billion, because the cost of less than full recovery of the economy is several $1 billion per week. So that will be money well spent. We could also be a bit more aggressive on the approval process, as long as the vaccine is shown to be completely safe, even if it's just about 50% or more effective, and not as high as 90%, let's say. We should go ahead with it. That's my personal opinion, because as long as safety is assured, the faster we move to vaccinate the population, faster we will get there in terms of bringing COVID under control. So that's one. Second, I had been very much with the government on not going fiscally on a kind of scale that the United States and some of the European economies went, 10% of the GDP or 12% of the GDP, that kind of fiscal stimulus. That was also being bandied around, being advocated around India. The government was very wise not to do that, because supply had been shocked as much as the demand at the time. And with supply in complete shock, with workers not able to return to work, with input markets disrupted because of the inability to transact, there was no way a demand stimulus could have generated a supply response. But now I think we are in a situation where supply response is entirely possible. and therefore demand stimulus could be of some help. And again, I recommend, some 1 to 2% of the GDP if we can quickly do the transfers, but both to rural and actually tilted a bit more towards urban consumer, urban poor. And given our ability now to make these transfers rapidly through the Jan Dhan accounts, that will be money well spent as well. I'm generally fiscally conservative, but in this case, I think we will recover the money. Again, the faster we recover, the more we gain in terms of returning the economy back on its feet. So that's my second sort of recommendation. The third, it is very clear that in spite of a good bit of support that the government gave, that was given on the credit side in terms of delayed repayments of the loans, in terms of restructuring and so forth, one-time restructuring without any cost. Still, with all that, there will be businesses that mostly which may not be anyway viable in the long run and not profitable in the long run, will go out. There will be bankruptcies. More non-performing assets will accumulate in the banks. And this vulnerability, of course, we know is much more in the public sector banks. So I think as a third step, I would say the government should go in a very substantial way to recapitalize the banks in advance. We should not repeat the mistake we did previously, when in 2015 or 16 we came up under Indra Dhanush with very relatively small package of 70,000 crore for recapitalization, and then of course it had to be upped to 2 lakh crore rupees later on, or 2 trillion rupees. That mistake should not be repeated. That was too little, too late. I think we should go more in advance, get the banks ready, because nothing will hurt the economy more on the way to its recovery than a fall in the credit growth. We do not want credit crunch to happen. Fourth, I would say, this is something I've said repeatedly, that it is time for the privatization to move on a very substantial scale. Even with this very limited fiscal response, our fiscal deficit during the year fiscal year 2021 is going to be 12 to 13%. Debt to GDP ratio would rise from 72% to about 84, 85%. It's a very high debt to GDP ratio. We need to do something about it, and privatization clearly is a major step that can be taken towards that. That, I think, is my fourth thing. And it's also, anyway, I think privatization for the economy is a very good thing. All evidence shows that public sector enterprises have performed extremely poorly relative to their private sector counterparts. Even the enterprises that have actually been privatized under Prime Minister Vajpayee in 2002 and 2003 now are doing incredibly well compared to their counterparts, which were identified for privatization but were not actually privatized. Sort of what I would say short-term measure that the government ought to take. I think just quickly looking to the future, I think prospects look very good. I would say that post-COVID decade would certainly India grow at 8% plus. We can actually, I say that with conviction because post-COVID decade would be very different for the reasons of number of reforms that we have already put in place. We now have a very low corporate profit tax in place. The IBC, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, that is in place. So a very good bankruptcy process is available to the outgoing businesses. GST, I think, initially we had some bit of teething pains initially, but it is now pretty much in place, about 95%. It's fully functional. So its benefits now will begin to come. We have the labor law reform that has happened, which is again a very, very important reform. Farm law reforms that have happened, very, very important. Digitization, another very important step. I think huge progress in digitization, which ought to help productivity. Whole set of new things that have happened, which perhaps were not there about 2 years or 3 years ago, in place. And so I think that is what makes me so confident. Now I will finally mention 3 or 4 structural reforms that we need to do. that are still outstanding. I'll just list them, which is what we ought to be doing before the end of the current term of the present government. Number one, I think we have gone into this import substitution, meaning we have imposed large number of tariffs on products. This has not been our policy actually for the last 2 to 3 decades, starting 1991, when we actually progressively liberalized the economy. We need to reverse that import substitution. Globalization is an extremely, perhaps the most important aspect of our reform process. And so that needs to be put back in place. Land laws, I think we still have very serious issues, not only in agriculture also. For example, tenancy laws are very poor. Tenancy is not even recognized in most states. So, but I'm talking more on the urban side. Economic transformation involves the movement of workforce out of agriculture into industry and services. That means ability of people to find good places to live at affordable prices. And that means low land prices. And in the land markets in India, for a variety of reasons, a number of these measures that need to be taken, which I list in detail in my book, India Unlimited, which came out this year. So I'll not list them, but large number of things need to be done on land laws and land markets. Financial sector needs to be strengthened further, apart from the recapitalization I mentioned. I think we need to move towards much larger number of private banks, meaning, and not just private, but privatize the public sector banks. Currently, the government owns 12 such banks. Of these, the bottom 6 have only, they account for only 15% of the assets of the public sector banks. Privatize them, that should be the first step. But, the government really doesn't need that large number of such a large number of banks. And that also creates all kinds of governance problems and regulatory problems for the central bank and all, and for the banks themselves as well. So that needs to be done as well. I think finally, I would say one important step states would need to take as well. Under the new revised labor laws, the government gives the states the authority to raise the limit on the number of workers in the firm. So the current law is that after the reform that the government recently did, that any firm which has 300 workers or fewer has the right to terminate workers without seeking any kind of permission from the government. But at 300 or more, you require that permission, which state governments then tend not to give. But the law permits states through notification, not even a legislation, through notification to raise that limit. Now, as some of you would know, very recently, when COVID had hit, two states, Gujarat and Uttar Pradesh, had said that for 3 years they wanted to suspend all labor laws, which of course this central government denied, and it was an irrational thing to do. But states that were willing to go that far ought to now raise this limit from 300 to about 10,000 workers, I would say. Let the large firms come in. India's big problem has been lack of large and medium firms in labor-intensive sectors. Things like apparel, footwear, furniture, a lot of light manufacturing. We just don't have medium and large firms. Auto parts, petroleum refining, pharmaceuticals. This is a different story. Their technology forces you to have large firms. But in labor-intensive firms where both small and micro firms can exist, that is all we have. No medium and large firms. Medium and large firms in these sectors are essentially critical, absolutely critical, because they are the ones who operate in the global economy. So we need to hook up these sectors into the global economy. That requires larger firms, and therefore the states need to relax on this particular labor law for which they have the full authority under the central government law. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Panagariya, for a very enlightening address. Our second keynote. For that, we'd like to invite Mr. Rajeev Misra, CEO, SoftBank Vision Fund. Well, the last year has been one of the most disruptive in living memory. As coronavirus spread across the world, disrupting lives, billions of people adapted to a new world in just a few days, be it working from home or doing almost everything online, from birthday parties to work meetings to international meetings. Everything is happening online. It has been a learning on the job for everyone. Our next keynote addresses just that, disruption. Please welcome Mr. Misra.
I'd like to thank Business Today for the opportunity to speak with you. I'd like to address how companies can leverage technology to reach 1 billion people and some of the sectors we're excited about investing during this period and post-COVID. Our vision was to invest in businesses that are enabling the next stage of the information revolution using AI and big data. I've always believed artificial intelligence will have a greater impact on the economy than the PC, internet, or mobile stages of the information revolution over the past 20 years. And the impact of AI on the global GDP, including India, will be a lot more rapid and faster over the next 3 to 5 years. COVID-19 has validated our vision and accelerated it. In India, we need to make the most of the opportunities presented by the AI revolution. Of course, there are many reasons for optimism. India is one of the fastest digitizing economies in the world, is leading the world in areas like identity. More than 1.2 billion Indians now have an Aadhaar card. And technology could dramatically increase productivity across most sectors of the economy and create tens of millions of new jobs. But there are also reasons for concern. We still need more Indian tech companies to compete on the global stage. We need to close the digital divide to ensure all Indians have the opportunity to participate in the information revolution. Indian small businesses and agriculture are lagging behind larger ones in adopting technology, and the gap is likely to grow post-COVID. As my friend Ulrika Hoffmann-Shurchardi has pointed out, physical businesses that have been challenged by the pandemic will not be able to rejoin the race in the same place and within the same speed. They will find it more difficult to compete against digital businesses that have used data to train with increased intensity during the crisis. The amount of digital acceleration equals a commensurate increase in the competitive moat of digital businesses. Let's consider 4 ways Indian businesses can leverage advances in technology to reach 1 billion people. First, businesses need to be data and mobile first. Thanks to visionaries like Mr. Mukesh Ambani, smartphones with cheap data are now ubiquitous. Mobile will ultimately be how businesses offer most of their services, and it provides the data they need to learn and improve their offerings. So they need to ensure they have the data and mobile first mindset with their best engineers working on mobile. It sounds obvious to many of us, but unfortunately, most businesses still do not take this approach. Consider Lenskart, the eyewear chain. 50% of their business already comes from their mobile app. Their app uses augmented reality to allow you to try on different pairs of eyeglasses. It also uses AI to offer size and frame recommendations based on facial analysis. The app provides a stream of data on user preferences that allows Lenskart to learn and better target their products. For 90% of users, their technology can now size the user's face within 3% of their face size. And this accuracy is improving as the data set grows. That's what a data and mobile first approach looks like. Second, with some exceptions, businesses need to be omni-channel and provide a seamless experience to their customers across mobile and brick and mortar. Lenskart has 600 stores across the country. Because eyeglasses are still a touch and feel product to many people, they need to do so. A traditional optician would carry all the inventory in store. This makes it difficult to scale. Lenskart overcomes this challenge by offering you an iPad installed within their augmented reality technology, so you can try on different frames virtually while you're in store. This has multiple benefits. It allows Lenskart to only carry about 5% of his inventory on site so they can scale easily. It allows Lenskart to capture and access valuable user data in store, which leads to higher conversion and is used to predict design trends, which can be fed back to their factories. Usually physical businesses don't have access to such data. It also provides Lenskart a better user experience for their customers. Users can browse thousands of designs without having to try on the physical product. They then ship your glasses to your doorstep within 2 days. Which brings us to the next requirements to reach 1 billion people. The first wave of tech disruption focused on urban India. Today, growth is coming from the non-metro regions. Technology has now reached those cities and businesses need to as well. Here, there are two key needs: world-class logistics and support for vernacular languages. Fortunately, world-class logistics is now available to all thanks to the delivery company, Delivery. There are two major challenges to delivery in India: the unreliability of PIN codes and handwritten addresses. Delivery solved these challenges by remapping India using the database of delivery history. This was a remarkable feat. But they've gone further. For example, they also use the data to optimize delivery times to ensure the recipient is available to receive the package, which dramatically calls and cuts down missed deliveries and saves time and money. This has enabled them to create a nationwide network that extends beyond 17,500 postal codes and 2,300 cities. Thanks to delivery, businesses don't need to build a shop in every city. They can quickly and affordably ship their products across the country at a much cheaper cost. That gives the businesses a scale they need to overcome low average order sizes, which is the case in India. The other key to reaching the non-metro regions is support for local languages. Here, the leaders are big companies like Amazon and Flipkart, which offer their products in half a dozen languages. Going forward, companies will need to dramatically increase their investment in local language support to reach their customers. These imperatives were already present before the pandemic, but COVID has pulled forward these trends by years. My view is that the past 12 months of COVID has accelerated the AI disruption in our industry across the globe by at least 3 years. What would have taken 3 years to achieve has been achieved over the past 12 months. The pandemic has catalyzed once-in-a-generation shifts in behavior around the world and will permanently reshape the Indian economy in ways that we are just beginning to understand. Those who don't adapt and adapt quickly will be left behind. Of course, some areas will be impacted greater than others. Let's consider three of the sectors, and there are many, I'm just picking three, we are most excited about, which are education, payments, and healthcare. Technology is the great leveler, and the application of technology in education is one of the most impactful ways to reduce income inequality. I believe that the necessary conditions are now in place for EdTech adoption to take place in India. First, technology is solving the demand and supply issues. Smartphones and data plans are now affordable. Access to the mobile internet is widespread and growing quickly. Online learning can support large class sizes of high quality, which drives down cost. On the supply side, many of the country's best teachers are now onboarded and using technology to create high quality content. India has a number of world-class EdTech companies like Byju's, Vedantu, and Unacademy. Second, COVID has provided the push needed to spur the adoption of EdTech. It highlighted the effectiveness of live education platforms and in many cases made them a necessity for tens of millions of children. The revolution in EdTech will improve standards and outcomes across the board, in my belief, while students will return to classrooms in the next few months. The future of education is a hybrid of online and offline learning. Last year, we invested in Unacademy, which provides live interactive classes to help students prepare for competitive exams, for jobs, universities, etc. Since COVID, live use of Unacademy's programming has increased sevenfold. On a very optimistic, I'm very, very optimistic about the transformation potential of EdTech, because like healthcare, education is a key building block for our next generation. And there's a shortage of providers, both in education and in healthcare, that this could solve. Another area, which is payments, is poised for further disruption. Of course, it was already a highly competitive and dynamic sector in India, but COVID has accelerated the transition from cash to digital payments in a variety of ways. Lockdowns have spurred many people to go online and share their account details for the first time. There's been a surge in online activity, particularly in e-commerce, which is driving demand for digital payments. We are seeing rapid penetration in new segments like pharmacy, online poultry, etc. in non-metro areas. For health reasons, people don't want to touch anything they don't have to and are avoiding cash transactions. The banks are also raising limits on contactless payments, so users don't need to touch keypads. There's been a resurgence in applications like phone top-ups, person-to-person payments, and bill splitting, etc. These changes should drive a wave of innovation in the sector. As discussed earlier, businesses will need to complement their physical stores with apps and websites to attract and retain customers. Banks will need to accelerate the shift away from branch banking and develop new online processes to issue products like unsecured loans and credit cards without in-person contact. Similarly, the payment companies will need to innovate with new products like buy now, pay later, and equated monthly installments to reduce the impact of the economy, which is slowing down on customer wallets. In summary, there is a tremendous opportunity ahead, and we are tracking these changes with great interest. Healthcare is another sector, especially for India, that's going to be highly catalyzed, not only because of COVID, but because of the digital disruption. And COVID has just accelerated that change due to lockdowns and overflowing hospitals. Doctors and patients have finally embraced telemedicine for diagnosis and treatment. We have several portfolio companies, dozens across the globe in healthcare. Companies like Ping An Good Doctors online consultations in China have increased ninefold during COVID. And they believe a third of all illnesses can be better managed online. Virtual care is now a permanent part of many practices, and more countries will adopt a digital-first approach for healthcare. India could benefit disproportionately from this shift. The country has a shortage of hospital beds and doctors, particularly in rural areas. For example, India has just 0.9 beds per 1,000 people versus 4.2 in China, and 0.8 physicians per 1,000 people versus 1.8 in China. Telemedicine could improve access and quality of care in a cost-effective way, in my view. We recently announced our investment in a predictive health company, for example, that is using data and machine learning to help clinicians predict and prevent serious medical events, including cardiac arrest and high blood pressure and strokes, to be able to predict them a few weeks before it is going to happen. The application of such technology in India could dramatically improve outcomes. However, unlike many other sectors, digital disruption in healthcare is still very early in India. Some promising areas include omni-channel delivery platforms like Ping An Good Doctor, which offer both in-person clinics and telemedicine, electronic health records, consumer apps that personalize care and empower people to improve their health. More broadly, I'm also very excited about advances in genomics. It's a huge market that will require significant capital, particularly in three areas. First, diagnostics, identifying and monitoring diseases using genetic sequencing combined with data sciences. Second, developing better treatments based on those diagnostics, for instance, by targeting the genetic underpinnings of disease. Third, the next frontier, which will take another 4 to 5 years, is influencing our genes to cure diseases by rewriting them, for example, by using gene and cell therapies. Let's take cancer as an example. On the diagnostics front, Guardant Health, Grail, and others have developed blood tests that have gone down in cost from $400 a test to $60, $70 a test, that enable identification of genetic mutations that drive cancers and are able to do liquid biopsy to detect early stage or late stage cancers without doing a physical biopsy. For treatments, companies such as Relay Therapeutics are developing targeted therapies that drug those specific mutations and may promise greater impact with better safety. Finally, in the coming years, we will continue to expand our ability to genetically engineer cells, such as T cells, to treat cancers and prevent relapse. I'm incredibly excited about the potential for health tech to dramatically improve the quality of our lives over the next 5 to 7 years. In closing, it's clear that the world will never go back to the way it was pre-COVID. Whatever the new normal is, the way we live has been forever changed. With the arrival of 5G, exponential improvements in chip performance, the cost of computing has gone down dramatically. Advances in machine learning and the effects of COVID as a disruptor is being dramatically accelerated. And the behavioral changes are here to stay. Every industry will be impacted, from education to food delivery, to payments, to e-commerce, hospitality, retail, finance, and beyond. Looking ahead, we'll continue to live with significant uncertainty for the foreseeable future. With luck, 2021, most countries will reach herd immunity through vaccination. We will then enter a post-pandemic transition period that will bring many aftershocks until the dust settles sometime in 2022 or 2023. This presents tremendous opportunity because risk always does if you plan for it. I believe this time will also give rise to a new generation of startups with the potential to help 1 billion people in India live more productive, sustainable, and healthier lives. At the Vision Fund and SoftBank, our goal is to find those fearless and forward-thinking founders and give them the capital and support the need through our ecosystem of 110 portfolio companies that we have invested in globally to create a more fulfilling future for us all. All the best, and thank you.
There are lots of things that I really enjoy. When you're able to travel, I have done various, whether it's scuba diving, hang gliding, things like that are things that I really love, this adrenaline rush, adventure sports. But in the current, I think very early, because of the nature of what I do, which is work in the hospital, was important to learn the ability to compartmentalize and leave, the trauma, the tension of patients, of, who's unwell, being able to leave that. And while we're on call and our phones are always on because someone may be reaching out to us, I try to be able to be in the moment wherever you are. So whether it's having dinner at home with family or figuring out, which wonderful book to read because there's just so much to read. So I enjoy reading. I like music. I love nature. And so walking, trekking, hiking, or just a walk in the park. Hyderabad is blessed with, this Chiran Palace or KBR Park as it's called. So all these are things that give me a lot of pleasure. I also got into meditation with the Isha Foundation. So there's the Shambhavi Mahamudra, which is Mahamantra, which is, quite powerful. Combination of all this helps me unwind. I think health checkups are one of the most important health mantras. And while everybody's been consumed with the pandemic, the fact is, like the Lancet editor very well said, we're in the middle of a syndemic. There is the pandemic of COVID. There is the underlying epidemic of non-communicable disease, which is heart disease, cancer, etc., which is catching Indians younger, which is more devastating. And most importantly, there are lifestyle-related disorders, which have a lot of biochemical signals that can be picked up early to be prevented, or genetic testing now for cancer. So I think health checkup is another very important one too, besides the healthy living, stress management, and being able to find the right balance. You know, there's so many. I definitely love London and Italy. Goa is a very powerful one. But I also think there's so many fantastic places in India. I enjoyed Bhubaneswar. I would love to do Leh and Ladakh, haven't been able to, but Nepal was outstanding. Mountains anywhere are very, very exciting. And even a simple day in Mahabalipuram or Pondicherry are fantastic. I think if it's not dated, I did it a long time ago and have continued to upgrade, but I think my iPad is just the most intelligent thing I ever bought myself. All the accessories around it, because it's just so much a part of our life. We're Zooming on it, we're working on it, we're entertaining ourselves on it. I'm very bad for a retailer. I like shopping, but it's not iconic luxury products. Brands don't excite me at all, actually.
With that, we come to our third keynote address. Mr. Sanjiv Mehta, CEO and Managing Director, Hindustan Unilever. When the economy was in the dumps and disruption was the norm, it was a trying time for large corporates. So what did large corporations do at a time when business was down? It was a time to take a hard look at what all you could change and in turn, of course, cut costs. Innovation and disruption was the name of the game. We have with us Mr. Sanjiv Mehta, CEO and Managing Director, Hindustan Unilever, who speaks to us on navigating business through chaos and confusion.
Greetings, everyone. I wish you and your loved ones a safe and healthy and a very happy 2021. The unpredictable nature of the world, like the situation of COVID-19, reflects the lack of predictability, the prospects for surprise, the multiplex of forces, the speed of change, the confounding of issues, no cause and effect chain, the haziness of reality, the potential for misreads, and the mixed meanings of conditions. Tom Friedman of New York Times refers to COVID-19 as part of a herd of stampeding black elephants. The other potential crises stampeding towards us include climate change, social and economic inequality, ocean and ecosystem collapse, water scarcity, amongst many others. Social, economic, and environmental issues that existed prior to the pandemic have been pushed into stark focus. As well as the direct economic impact, many of these issues could drive social instability, civil unrest, nationalism, debt and credit crisis, protectionism, geopolitical realignment, and even possibly military conflict, further magnifying the economic consequences. From mid-80s to the mid-2000s was a period of relative calm, a time of unprecedented stability, growth, and prosperity. Ben Bernanke of US Fed famously called it the Great Moderation. In recent times, the convergence of many trends has made it clear that relative stability of the past is ceding to a period of increased turbulence. Leaders need to rethink their assumptions about constancy, build adaptive capacity, robustness, and resilience deep into their organizations, and reassess crisis readiness throughout the extended enterprises. 2020 made it clear that leaders must look beyond their organizations, taking a true stakeholder view to help address oft-overlooked economic, healthcare, justice, and other inequities underlying the fragility of the current order. This will not be the last annus horribilis. The challenge for leaders is to step up now to be better prepared for the next one. Even as we imagine being done with this crisis, let me be clear, crisis is surely not done with us. Crisis is our new companion. Consider the conditions that greeted us on New Year's Day 2021. We were shepherded into a world still battling a pandemic, though thankfully in some parts of the world, like ours, perhaps in its latter stages. There will still be dangerously yawning social divides, with spiraling global economic inequality further threatened by fast advancing technology. There'll be eroding trust in every institution you can name. Look at what happened in the cradle of democracy in the first week of this year. And yes, we have less than a decade to save the planet from eventual inhabitability. Leading into the focus, leading into the future is not for the meek, but neither it is for the arrogant, the bullheaded, or the blindly self-righteous. We need the brave, but we also need the modest. We need those who hold themselves accountable, but we also need those who are curious and experimentative. We are stakeholders not only in our own companies, but in the health, happiness, and prosperity of the planet and those who inhabit it. The agenda for every leader will now have to include paying attention to the existential threats to society's well-being. We will be steering our companies through unknowns. It will sometimes feel like all we have to rely on is trust in our people and the trust in us. The jobs of leaders in a world marked by disruption and threat will have never been more difficult nor more important. With our perspective, let me now dwell on what leaders could do to be effective in an ambiguous and chaotic world. First, put compassion at the center of leadership. 2020 has shown us that it is urgent and necessary, not just desirable, to humanize leadership. The way we have been portraying, promoting, and practicing leadership for decades as a cocktail of vision, passion, and skill makes leaders many times ill-prepared to recognize and alleviate human suffering, let alone address the systemic issues that cause and perpetuate it. It is time for those who care for good leadership to put compassion at the center of leadership. Perhaps we need to stop conjuring foes that leaders need to fight and help leaders focus on healing and renewing our relationships and building institutions instead. People need cry, not a battle cry, said an associate professor of organizational behavior at NCR. Compassionate leaders look after the people. Look after your people and people will look after your business should be the maxim. Second, be a brutal optimist. The job of a leader is to provide brutal optimism, a clear account of the challenges that lay ahead, but credible hope that collectively they have the strategy and the resources to overcome the crisis. Confronting the tough truth of your situation is essential to overcoming it. Optimism will spur you to action, but realism guards against being naive and crushing disappointment. Leaders therefore need to play two parts, the front stage and the backstage role of leadership. In the front stage spotlight, leaders inspire and assure their teams, sending a message of hope and sharing their vision with the organization. They also show empathy and public commitment. These leaders are simultaneously kind and humble, showing the caring side of the personality. All of these qualities must be combined with the backstage role, in which leaders take a blunt and realistic approach to the serious threats at hand. Behind the scenes, leaders gather information and expertise, share facts, and dive deeply into processes, whether financial, technological, or human, to adapt and follow through on their plans. Third, reorient your roadmap with sense making. The challenges of 2020 highlight the importance of sense making, coming up with effective ways to make sense of the complex external world we are living in. When the pace of change is this fast, managers need to make sure that people update their understanding of shifts in technology, markets, customers, and competitive moves. Sense making involves pulling together disparate views to create a plausible understanding of the complexity around us, and then testing that understanding to refine it, or if necessary, abandon it or start over. Sense making has been recognized as vital to the success and survival of organization since Carl Wake introduced the term back in 1979. It is considered essential for innovation, crucial to the development of nimble teams and organizations. For example, a team trying to create more innovative products in the FMCG industry need to be aware of shifts in scientific knowledge, the new ways that companies are collaborating with each other, the changing consumer behavior, the impact of emerging channels, and the new regulatory regime. Sense making never leads to a flawless picture of what is happening. The world is uncertain and constantly changing, and our understanding will always have limits. Sense making is not about achieving omniscience, it's about learning. Sense making ability means having a wide network, an ability to reach out to many stakeholders, listen, see patterns in complexity, and think across polarities such as efficiency versus effectiveness or safety versus economy. Fourth, realize that the days of lone riders are over. All of us need all of us and not some of us. The pandemic has shown us that this crisis is neither a one country problem and nor can one country solve it. It will require the collective efforts of the world community. Collective action within communities and internationally will enable more rapid and peaceful exit from the crisis. In fact, if we cannot globally contain the spread of the pandemic, we may see a resurgence later. The virus has exposed the dangers of connectedness without cooperation. We were unable to stop a global crisis because we did not rally a global response to it. Hence, despite the divisiveness, the cause for winning as one world is more important than ever before. This will also be vital to ensure that when the vaccines are produced, they are not cornered only by the rich and powerful, but there is fair distribution. No one is stronger than all of us collectively. As far as businesses are concerned, it is increasingly going to be about collaboration, partnerships, alliances, and even for some issues of societal importance, about hard-nosed competitors coming together. Atmanirbhar Bharat, as our Prime Minister Mr. Modi has clarified, is not shutting down doors to the outside world of becoming protectionist in nature, but becoming a bigger and more important part of the global economy. Fifth, respond to crisis with speed and agility. It seems obvious that when faced with a crisis, companies should simply dial up more speed and agility. But this is easier said than done. Speed is not simply an attribute of an organizational activity tied to a clock time. Rather, speed is a complex, performance-enhancing organizational capability that requires a holistic approach to its development and execution. Speed alone enables companies to operate quickly, only in already established product domains. During a crisis, companies must also demonstrate agility, a capability that allows the organization to pivot to adjacent or entirely new product domains. Speed depends on three interconnected capabilities. Recognition speed, how quickly external stimuli are recognized as an opportunity or threat. Decision speed, how quickly decisions are made. And execution speed, how quickly resources, people, or processes are mobilized to support the action. It is important for all aspects of speed to be in sync. When they are, companies are able to speed up multiple organizational activities simultaneously. Agility is a bundle of dynamic capabilities, the alertness to the need for change, the ability to decide on a new course of action, and the ability to effectively reconfigure and mobilize the resources necessary for change. When faced with an external stimulus like COVID-19, organizations must enact all three elements of agility to effectively carry out change. Speed and agility are interdependent, and leaders need to recognize that speed and agility are related to other aspects of the organization, such as structures, company resources, compensation, and executive leadership. Sixth, be adaptive and resilient. We have realized that even the best prediction models, we cannot predict our way to a no-risk world. This therefore means that we must become far more adaptable. The crisis has shown adaptable teams retool in a matter of days. On the other hand, seemingly successful organizations with vast prediction capabilities paralyzed as the virus spread. During the crisis, many organizations driven by low cost, high efficiencies, and capacity utilization were caught on the wrong foot. These businesses need to determine which parts of the value chain do they manage for cost and efficiencies, and where do they build for redundancy so that it is resilient to shocks. Just as there is need for businesses to build adaptability and resilience, so is the need for nations. Seventh, live your purpose and values. Last but not the least, our purpose and values should be our guiding star. These are not just well-articulated statements that are framed and hung in corporate boardrooms. These are what defines us and drives us in good times and bad. The exigencies of a crisis should not lead to compromising on our purpose and values. In fact, they enable the leader to keep a cool head amid chaos. There is a striking parallel between great crisis leaders and parents who must stay firm on values and principles while still giving their children space to develop. A very delicate balance indeed. Let me now sum it all up. Leading through ambiguity and chaos is a test of character. To successfully navigate, leaders must adjust, improvise, and redirect as the situation changes and new information emerges. Leaders need courage to seize opportunities. They also understand they will make mistakes along the way and they will have to pivot quickly as this happens, learning as they go and not being deterred by failures. It is perfectly fine for leaders not to have all the answers. They empower the people and delegate to the edge. There is ample evidence to show that leaders who trust and empower the teams unleash powerful potential. The common characteristics of great crisis leaders are a robust stress management capability, abundant resilience, networking prowess, vast social capital, a strong commitment to inclusivity, and a cool head when others overreact. Great crisis leaders live the purpose and values of the organization to inspire loyalty and to generate the best ideas. They also accept that luck plays a role in the success, and they admit this rather than claiming complete credit for every victory. Humility is, after all, vital to rallying an organization behind a strategy. Successful leaders constantly analyze what has happened and as the crisis unfolds, gauge their success and adapt their strategy. However, they always stay true to their non-negotiable values, such as accountability, credibility, integrity, humility, and kindness, which can be thought of as a compass guiding their mission. Strategy, on the other hand, is treated like a GPS that needs to be adjusted constantly to reach their final destination. Thank you, and may God bless you all.
I think the unwinding formula is have a satisfying day's work and other things just fall in place. Whatever you do after that, whether listen to music, see TV, family time, all that is unwinding if you have had a good working day. Many passions beyond work, sports, playing, watching, music, partying, but of course partying is out these days because of COVID. But yeah, I mean normal passions. Some yoga, some walking. I'm not too much of a gym person, but yeah, regular yoga and regular morning walks that keep you fairly fit. Maldives.
Maldives.
I think the most politically correct reply is family. But other than that, nothing is really luxury. I mean, cars and house and all that is normal. No real luxury possession.
With that, we move on to our next keynote address. Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, Chief Scientist, World Health Organization. Well, the biggest issue across the world over the past 1 year has been related to health. It is the biggest health emergency we've seen in a very long time. The last keynote of the day is about that. Our next speaker is Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, Chief Scientist at the World Health Organization. She's a pediatrician and globally recognized researcher on tuberculosis and HIV. She has 30 years of experience in clinical care and research. Ms. Swaminathan was also the Secretary to the Government of India for Health Research and Director General of the Indian Council of Medical Research from 2015 to 2017. Dr. Swaminathan will speak on the new global healthcare dynamics. Please welcome Dr. Swaminathan.
Greetings from the World Health Organization. I'm Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, the Chief Scientist. It gives me great pleasure to speak with you all today and share some of my thoughts. In fact, the Science Division at WHO was only created in 2019, and it seems as though, it was just in time for this pandemic. Our goal post is, of course, the Sustainable Development Goals that we need to achieve by 2030. And while many of them are interlinked and progress in one impacts progress on the other, I'm more concerned, of course, about the Sustainable Development Goal 3, which is the one on health, which talks about really achieving universal health coverage for the entire population of the world. Presently, just to be clear, half the world, 50% or more, does not have access to quality health services, essential health services. And if you really define that package to be much more comprehensive, then one would probably find that more than 50% of the world does not have access. And therefore, there's a huge gap that we need to fill. Only 10 years left to do it. And if we think about just India, then again, India is like many different countries. There is no one statistic that applies across India. And if you take any parameter, any statistic, one sees variations between segments of the population, urban, rural, based on socioeconomic status, between states, etc. And so there are glaring inequalities and iniquities that really need to be addressed in order to achieve that goal of health for all by 2030. As far as the past year is concerned, and the fact that it's been exactly a year now since this new virus was identified as a novel coronavirus in China, what became clear is that no country in the world, barring maybe a handful, were really prepared for something like this. And this is something that's been, it has been mentioned in the past by several scientists, several groups, the WHO, saying that the world is not prepared for a major outbreak or a pandemic. One expected the next pandemic to be an influenza pandemic. However, another respiratory virus, it was clear that it could happen at any time. And the elements of surveillance, prevention, detection, response, all were found to be lacking. And we see even today, a year later, when we know so much more about the virus, that many areas of the world are having explosive outbreaks, unable to control transmission, with increasing numbers of people being infected and dying. And today we are somewhere close to 20 million known infections. We know the real number is maybe 8 to 10 times higher, and close to 2 million deaths globally. But there are, of course, a few countries that dominate both the caseload and the deaths. What also became clear is that countries that had invested in public health and primary healthcare systems, even though they used low-tech measures, they actually did better. And I'm thinking about countries like Vietnam, like Thailand, like Senegal, where they used their primary healthcare system, they used their network of community health workers and the strong links with the community in order to, and their past experience with infectious diseases. In the case of Southeast Asia, it was SARS-1. In the case of Africa, they have experience with TB, with HIV, with Ebola, and so on, malaria. So they were able to actually use that experience and their on-the-ground public health workers to actually detect and respond relatively much faster than many high-income countries that have excellent tertiary healthcare facilities, but have over the years, their public health surveillance and response systems have been weakened. I think this is a good lesson for India as we build our health systems. It's clear it's not enough to have investments in tertiary healthcare systems alone, because first of all, that's often skewed. It's available only in the cities and not in the rural areas. And secondly, that alone is not going to help us achieve the goals that we want. We often say that universal health coverage and response to health emergencies are two sides of the same coin, because ultimately what you're looking at is a resilient health system, which has enough physical infrastructure, human resources, the data systems, the lab networks, the governance mechanisms, the supply chains, including cold chain facilities, all of this built in with spare capacity to be able to respond to these kind of emergencies. And let's not kid ourselves. I think this is going to happen increasingly in the future. This is certainly not the last pandemic that we're going to see, and it's certainly not the last health shock we're going to see. As we've seen, climate change and health are also very closely linked, and the number of events around the world of extreme climate events that have resulted in floods and landslides, in fires, in earthquakes are going to increase. And so people are going to be exposed to both biological and non-biological threats. And that's why the health system resilience is very important. The second, I think, is to have a very good system of collaboration, both within the country and outside, especially for innovation, R&D, and developing the tools that are needed. India was able to very quickly respond to this challenge. In fact, it was the private sector that responded really quickly to the needs of the country and started producing diagnostics, reagents, consumables, personal protective equipment. And we've seen a huge amount of innovation in this area over the last year, including, of course, the development of several indigenous vaccines and several indigenous diagnostics that have enabled India to be one of the first countries to start a vaccination program. So clearly there's huge capacity. And perhaps what is missing is the prioritization, which of course needs to be done by the government in consultation with all stakeholders, of what are the high priority tools that are needed in the country to tackle all our other major public health problems, and then a partnership with the private sector in order to enable not only the development, but then also the procurement and deployment of those tools. And I think what we've learned in this 1 year is going to hopefully help us to really build that ecosystem much better. It's also clear you need global collaboration for many things. You know, I've been personally involved in trying to convene several networks of experts that are working together on different aspects of the pandemic, starting with basic knowledge about the virus and its transmission. You all heard about these new variants. Now that's a very common property of the virus, but you need a global collaboration and a global understanding of sharing information, the database of these genomic sequences in order to use it effectively. So you need scientific collaboration, you need collaboration on R&D as well, you need collaboration on clinical trials, and there are many areas where one can learn from each other, rapid transfer of knowledge. We've reached a point where we have vaccines, several of them, within 1 year of the discovery of a new pathogen. And that's really the model, again, that should be adapted to other solving problems that we have for other diseases. The third lesson for me is that we need to pay attention to some of the risk factors and determinants of health. Again, as I mentioned, it's not enough to be able to just focus on the curative side. We need to focus very much on disease prevention and health promotion. And the kind of risk factors one knows which impacts on health are air, the quality of the air, the quality of the water, safe sanitation, housing, and a nice, good environment for people to live in, which really impacts on mental health. So without paying attention to these upstream factors, focusing only on developing the healthcare delivery system is not going to make our population healthier. And so we need to look at how to reduce air pollution, how to have safe drinking water, safe sanitation, etc. So again, looking even from the economic standpoint, India cannot be a superpower in terms of really being the global best in everything if we do not pay attention to the health and nutritional status of our population. So this is something that is challenging. It's multifactorial and therefore needs a multi-sectoral response to this problem. And there are many initiatives now that are focusing on this. It's clearly a national priority. We have the Poshan Abhiyan, we have the Ayushman Bharat program. We have programs related both for drinking water and the Swachh Bharat program, of course, which made huge amounts of progress in reducing open defecation. So all of these priorities have been identified and prioritized by the government, but it needs an all of society approach really to solve it. The government alone, it's very difficult to solve these challenging issues, and therefore it needs a private sector. It needs civil society. It needs the community to understand. And so the last area that I want to talk about is the scientific mindset and health literacy in the population. We've coined a new word called infodemic, which really describes the huge amounts of information that are being made available through all means, through media, through the lay press, through scientific publications, and ordinary lay people are being exposed to a lot of scientific information, which in turn has been a good thing. I think it's raised the profile of science. I think everybody understands today that the solutions for such problems come from science, but it also has resulted in a lot of misinformation or disinformation, rumors, myths, etc., circulating on social media, which we've had to pay attention to. And again, countries that have done well have really responded based on the scientific and public health advice that's been provided to them, and have focused their policies on the evidence. But again, this is something that one needs to create over a period of time, and therefore focusing science education for children and health literacy for the community as a whole, where people really understand the biological underpinnings of disease and do not believe in these kind of myths. Today, we are faced the same thing with vaccines, and the uptake of vaccines is going to be extremely important, and we need to ensure that people get the right information from the right sources and from credible individuals and leaders, so that they don't have any doubts about the vaccines that are going to be given to them. So that's actually a big challenge. And we've worked with a lot of tech companies around the world and interdisciplinary groups, behavioral scientists in particular, to try to tackle this. So going forward, it's also very clear we can't do a talk without talking about digital and how there's been a leapfrogging of the use of digital technologies and tools, particularly in health, but in all the fields. We're doing this talk remotely, where people are working from home. So whether it's education or finance or banking or health, this has advanced a lot. And the WHO has a global strategy on digital health, which really lays out the key areas where countries need to invest. Different countries are at different phases or maturity levels of their digital health infrastructure. And in a way, it's easier for countries that are starting from scratch, because we can build an infrastructure now knowing what the pitfalls are in some of the high-income countries that have very siloed approaches to dealing with data. So the whole area of using digital technologies and tools, collecting people's data, how one is governing the use of that data, these kind of things need to be expanded in order to improve the quality of healthcare. But I would also say that they need to be studied. Just because we have a digital technology or a tool or a new artificial intelligence algorithm, it doesn't mean that that's going to solve our problems. The tools need to be used wisely, they need to be governed wisely, and they need to be tested. Just like we test drugs and vaccines, we need to test some of these approaches in a scientific and rigorous manner to see if they achieve the goal of improving health outcomes. The fifth and final lesson is on the community engagement. I referred to that earlier. Countries or states that have very strong public health systems which are decentralized and where the unit at the local level, which is usually a sub-district level, say in India at the block level, or even at the primary healthcare center level, have a strong relationship with the community and have built over time trust and a dialogue and a two-way interaction. Those are the kind of systems that can do much better in an emergency because there's that trust that's been built up. And apart from that, we also have to do that in the case of chronic diseases like hypertension or diabetes. You need an ongoing engagement with people. So the whole transition from communicable diseases to non-communicable diseases, which has happened over large parts of India and it will continue to happen. And therefore, our focus also on keeping people healthier will need to shift. While we continue to have diseases like TB and malaria and dengue and other infectious diseases to contend with, the major burden is on non-communicable diseases. And in that basket comes also mental health. And mental health, again, has come to the forefront this year because of the impact the pandemic and the isolation and the loneliness and the loss of jobs, etc., loss of education opportunities. All of these have impacted the mental health of people, starting from the young to the elderly. And it's very clear, again, that we are not prepared. The health systems are not prepared. The communities are not prepared to cope with mental health problems at that scale.
Thyrocare, the trust, the truth.
Unwinding formula.
Yes.
Reading, family Zoom calls, going for long walks. When the COVID was not there, I used to go to the gym. And now I do all these TV sort of home gymnastics. I do yoga and I go for long walks. Hawaii. I don't think I have any, frankly. I mean, no. I don't spend on cars and watches or golf clubs. I don't. I mean, I don't spend much. The only thing I like to spend on, which gives me great joy, are travel and charities. So anytime I'm able to travel with family, go to new places. And remember, I grew up in Shillong, right? A very, very remote part of the world, totally disconnected from everything. And I was always like, God, I want to go to Buenos Aires. And I never thought I could, but now that I can, I love it. And then anytime I can give some money to some education society or rural healthcare or something, I just feel great. So I want to keep working only for those two reasons. If you said, why don't you stop working? It's like, hey, I want to travel more and I want to give money to charities.